The king who held royal meetings on his toilet throughout history. Kings and queens have been known for their eccentric habits, but none quite as bizarre as King Louis XIV of France, also known as the Sun King. While most rulers conducted their business in grand throne rooms or ornate chambers, Louis had a rather unconventional approach to governance that would shock modern sensibilities. He regularly held important state meetings, received foreign ambassadors, and conducted royal business while sitting on his toilet. This wasn't just an occasional occurrence or a quirky anecdote from history. For Louis XIV, the toilet became an extension of his throne room, a place where matters of state were discussed with the same gravity as if they were taking place in the Palace of Versailles' most magnificent halls. But why did one of history's most powerful monarchs choose such an unusual venue for conducting the affairs of an entire kingdom? To understand this peculiar habit, we must first examine the context of royal life in 17th century France. The concept of privacy as we know it today simply didn't exist for royalty. Every aspect of a king's life was considered a public affair, from the moment he woke up to when he went to sleep. The morning ritual of getting dressed, called the lever, was attended by dozens of courtiers who competed for the honor of handing the king his shirt or putting on his shoes. In this world where privacy was non-existent, bodily functions were not seen as private matters requiring solitude. The king's toilet, or what the French called the chaise percée, was simply another location where royal business could be conducted. It was no more private than his bedroom or dining hall, all of which were open to courtiers and officials throughout the day. Louis XIV took this lack of privacy to extraordinary lengths. He would receive ministers, discuss military strategies, review financial reports, and even meet with foreign dignitaries while relieving himself. Imagine being an ambassador from Spain or England, arriving at Versailles with important diplomatic matters to discuss, only to be ushered into the king's bathroom for your audience. The practice wasn't limited to brief conversations either. Some of these toilet meetings could last for hours. The king would sit there, conducting lengthy discussions about taxation, military campaigns, or court appointments while his courtiers stood respectfully nearby, acting as if this were the most natural thing in the world. One particularly famous incident involved the Duke of Saint-Simon, a prominent courtier and chronicler of Versailles life, who recorded numerous instances of these toilet audiences in his memoirs. He wrote about how ministers would arrive with stacks of documents, spreading papers on nearby tables while the king reviewed and signed them from his unusual seat of power. The toilet itself was quite elaborate, befitting a king of Louis's stature. It wasn't a simple chamber pot, but rather an ornate piece of furniture, often made of silver or decorated with precious metals and gems. Some accounts describe toilets upholstered in velvet and adorned with the royal coat of arms. Even in this most basic of human activities, the Sun King ensured that luxury and grandeur were maintained. Foreign visitors were often shocked by this practice. The English, in particular, found it deeply disturbing. English ambassadors wrote home describing their bewilderment at being received by the most powerful monarch in Europe while he was in such a compromising position. However, refusing such an audience was not an option, as it would be considered a grave insult to the crown. The practice extended beyond just Louis himself. Other members of the royal family and high-ranking nobles adopted similar customs. The king's brother, Philippe, Duke of Orleans, was known to hold his own toilet courts, as were several influential mistresses and court favorites. It became, in essence, a symbol of power and accessibility within the rigid hierarchy of Versailles. But there was method to what might seem like madness. For Louis, these toilet audiences served several purposes. First, they demonstrated his absolute power. Only the most important people could gain access to the king during these intimate moments, making such audiences highly coveted. Courtiers would compete fiercely for the privilege, seeing it as a sign of their standing in the royal favor. Second, it was incredibly efficient. The king had numerous bodily needs throughout the day, and by combining them with state business, he could maximize his productive time. In an era when kings were expected to be constantly available to their subjects and ministers, this arrangement allowed him to multitask in the most literal sense. Third, it was a form of psychological dominance. By receiving people in this vulnerable state, Louis was demonstrating that even in his most basic human moments, he remained superior to everyone around him. Visitors had to maintain their composure and dignity while addressing a king who was, quite literally, on the toilet. The practice also reflected the Sun King's philosophy of absolute monarchy. He famously declared, "L'état, c'est moi, I am the state." For Louis, there was no separation between his personal life and his role as monarch. The toilet meetings embodied this philosophy perfectly, showing that even the most private human functions were affairs of state when performed by the king. As bizarre as it sounds to modern ears, this practice continued throughout Louis's long reign, which lasted 72 years. Courtiers, ministers, and diplomats simply accepted it as part of life at Versailles. Some even came to prefer these intimate audiences, finding the king more relaxed and approachable during such moments. The custom began to fade after Louis's death in 1715. His successors, while maintaining many of the elaborate court rituals of Versailles, gradually moved away from conducting business in such intimate settings. The Age of Enlightenment brought new ideas about dignity, privacy, and appropriate behavior, even for royalty. Today, this historical curiosity serves as a fascinating window into a world where power, privilege, and protocol operated by completely different rules. It reminds us that what we consider normal or appropriate is often shaped by our cultural moment, and that even the most powerful people in history had habits that would seem outrageous by today's standards. The story of the king who held royal meetings on his toilet ultimately tells us as much about the nature of absolute power as it does about the strange customs of 17th century France. It shows how far people will go to accommodate those in authority, and how power can transform even the most mundane activities into affairs of state.